started to get ready.
When I got it.
That's no, it's okay. Everybody's chit-chatting.
Sorry.
All right. No, it's okay.
All good.
Okay. All right, I'd like to call to order the November 1st, 2021 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone who's here with us this evening, as well as those who are joining us remotely. I'd like to announce the board held an executive session on October 25th regarding legal matters. Board members with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda?
Me.
Oh, okay.
Can we pull out F in routine approvals?
Okay. Okay, anything else? All right, so at this time, Dr. O'Donnell is going to review some of the housekeeping items related to our hybrid format.
Thank you, Mrs. Concepcion. For our audience this evening, 30 minutes will be provided at the beginning of the meeting for public comment for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. If additional time is necessary, the board may consider reopening public comment after board business is completed or during the next meeting. Each individual will be limited to comments of 2 minutes as time permits for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. For action items, public comment will be held just prior to voting on that item as required by school code. This approach also allows for comments to be informed by the presentation of board's discussion of the respective items. During the meeting, the IT help desk is available if those viewing remotely encounter any technical difficulties. You may email our staff at itsuport@scasd.org or give them a call at 814-231-7743. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll have a roll call of board members present.
Dr. Gainer,
Here.
Ms. Goodell,
Here.
Ms. Brandt,
Here.
Ms. Concepcion,
Here.
Dr. Duffy,
Here.
Mr. Pizarro,
Here.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Here.
Mr. Leos,
Here.
Ms. Sidney.
Here.
Okay, at this time, we'll have the superintendent's update. Dr. O'Donnell?
You bet. I'm first going to share a couple communication items, and then I'll speak to the item we attached to your agenda. As the board knows, last week, because during our work session, you had a chance to greet the golf team, but our State High boys golf team won its first state championship in school history. The boys took home gold in the PIAA Class 3A Team Championship at Heritage Hills Golf Resort in York, Pennsylvania. Senior John Olson was the top little line, shooting a 70 to finish 1 under par. Other members of the team were Max Wager, Luke Janik, Joey Sable, and Thomas Hay. Congratulations to the team members and coaches Greg Wilson and Jim Shaper for a fantastic season. I'd also like to recognize 2 State High students recently who accomplished an extremely rare feat, a perfect advanced placement exam score with every possible point earned. Angela Abraham was one of 335 students worldwide who aced the computer science principles exam, after my heart, out of 119,144 test takers. Pretty impressive. Lorenzo Frippoli joined 219 students with a flawless portfolio for the drawing exam from the 18,345 students worldwide who submitted work. Congratulations to both students and their teachers. James Burns with computer science principles, and Mari Irwin Firmanek with AP Studio Art for their impressive achievements. Congratulations. Now moving, I think I doubled that golf score whenever I try to play. So shifting on all seriousness to the health and safety plan or pandemic update on your agenda. We're excited. Even this evening we learned a little bit more. It appears that this coming weekend we'll be seeing CVIM as well as Mount Nittany Health and possibly Geisinger, all three offering clinics for children ages 5 through 11. So we're just,
to the microphone.
sorry. It appears that this Saturday, I mean, we've been in collaboration with CVIM and in conversations with Geisinger and Mount Nittany Health, and it looks like all three organizations will be announcing clinics for this weekend. I know tomorrow we're planning to send all the information for all three organizations to families tomorrow. We will not be hosting clinics, but we will share, because parents are required to attend with their children, where those clinics will occur. And CVIM, for those of you who don't know, has a new facility off of Science Park Road, and it's real easy access. If it overflows in the parking lot, they have plenty of on-street parking there too, without a lot of traffic. So we'll share all that out, hopefully by noon tomorrow, so everybody can get access to how you sign up and times and things. But I know next weekend will be a big weekend, and we know the approval still has to take place.
Yep.
But we also know that tomorrow organizations are receiving vaccines, so it looks like it's probably likely. So, in regard to the update itself, as you can see, we're still seeing some positive student cases, and we noted that with updated data here. One of our concerns has been not only students who obviously are positive with COVID-19, but also close contacts and what that does to missing school. So you can see when you add up the numbers, you got several hundred students impacted and missing, at least a week of school or more. You have some data there in relationship to employees, and our professional staff is outlined there as well, of our faculty and administrators, as well as our support staff. In regard to bus notifications, you can see on the document, we made an adjustment so that we can let families know, because it has been difficult to do contact tracing on buses, to say the least. So I know Jean Knaus is with us online. I know Randy and Lynn are our clinic collaborators with the organization, so we can hopefully answer any questions that you have for us this evening regarding anything in the update or that we didn't include. So if you have any questions. Okay. Well, I figured the vaccine update would be positive, so
Exciting.
we'll make sure we work with the communications team and get that out in the morning as soon as possible.
Great.
So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. David and Lori, do you have a a legislative update?
Sure, I have a couple brief things here
Okay.
I'll mention here. First, I want to just briefly draw everyone's attention to the op-ed that was written by Donna Smith from Bellefonte a week ago about charter schools, and just positing out there whether there's something we want to respond to or add our efforts to. Of course, we're on the same page pretty much with that. It's an uphill battle, but we're still working at it. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that on October 23rd, the Psba Delegate Assembly met, and that's the time when we establish a legislative platform for the upcoming year. Most things carry over. The one most significant change to the platform is item 3.13, investment in education equity, and I'll just read a little bit of that just to give you a feel for it. Psba believes that all our students deserve access to an education that is relevant to their personal lives and experience, and that it is our responsibility as educators to seek to understand the uniqueness of each student and how their life experience may differ from our own. And then the concluding paragraph, in order to develop into knowledgeable and civically engaged students capable of positively impacting their community, Psba believes that every student receiving a public education in Pennsylvania needs and deserves to be taught a curriculum reflective of our nation's history, and to recognize how decisions that have made over the course of our history impact present experiences. For example, how as they apply to our financial, criminal justice, healthcare, and education systems. And given where we were a year ago at this time and the controversy that came at the Delegate Assembly, this strikes me as a step forward. Happy to answer any questions.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. All right, anything else on legislative? That's all?
Yeah, it's all quiet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, then Gretchen, the COG committee, or the COG report?
Yes, I do have a COG report this evening. So the first thing is that you all probably remember the Parks and Rec Master Plan Committee that the school district ended up having representation on, and then the master plan was written from the work of that committee. And now, one of the things recommended from the Parks and Recs Master Plan is for sort of a reorganization of the Parks Authority, the CRPR Parks Authority. And recommended in the master plan is that SCASD have representation on the authority in some manner. So the governance structure of that is currently being discussed. The executive committee has asked COG staff what individuals should be involved in the new committee. And so my recommendation as the COG liaison to board leadership would be, if our board agrees with that, which is written in the Parks and Rec Master Plan, that there be like an official letter from SCASD, from the SCASD board to the executive committee that representation is desired. That tends to move things along and keep things very clear and transparent. So again, this is nothing new. This was recommended in the master plan 2 years ago, but they are slowly implementing the master plan, and this is the step they're in right now. So anybody have any questions about that? Or?
What do you think of that being one of the committee placements, which is a December action each year during reorg?
I think so.
Because we do, when we look at all of our appointments, we do the PSBA liaison, and so it's kind of a liaison.
And it might be something the COG liaison should be assigned to, unless it's going to be too much for that one person, I guess. Yeah, I think that would make sense. But I think the first step then is to tell them we want the spot, right?
Yeah, and that's just because otherwise sometimes, even though it's in the master plan, it can kind of get forgotten.
Right.
And so if a letter from board leadership appears to the executive committee, they'll go, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
SCASD
And
should
previously,
probably.
the borough of State College had the,
Right,
for some reason, been delegated to appoint a SCASD representative. So,
correct.
Yeah, this makes much more sense for SCASD to elect their own representative. So.
Right, so as Amber said, currently, it is the case that the borough decides the representation from SCASD, to the authority. And so to make it sort of better communication from the district to the COG to have SCASD choose who that would be might be a better way to go about doing it. And we've had lots of conversations about this, so this is nothing new, but, okay, so I'll move on to the next.
Gretchen, do you
item.
need a letter, to go over to them?
That'd be great, yeah.
Confirm it?
Yep.
So, I mean, it makes sense with all this, the community kids, school-age programs that they run.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what came from the master plan, is that, consultants were hired who do this all over the region, and they said, wow, SCASD really needs to have more representation here. Normally, a school district does. There's a lot of cooperation amongst the parks, like at Fogelman Field, different places that
Yep.
SCASD that they use, and so let's start to have that communication flow a little bit better. So that's where that's coming from. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay.
Scott?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Do you know, is that expected or intended to be a board level position? Can it be a staff position? Is there, depending on the role within COG, it may make more or less sense for it to be one or the other? And I'm just thinking of time commitments, et cetera. So I didn't know whether that was
Yeah, and
something that had already been brought up.
Yeah,
or
Scott,
not.
that's a great question, and that's what's really interesting about this, is that amongst the other entities, it's an elected official who has served on this authority, except SCASD. And that just sort of evolved that way because the borough picks the representation from SCASD to the authority.
Right.
But it never really made sense because all the other entities had an elected official. So things were happening that the board, our board, SCASD board, never knew about because there was zero communication about how the parks were being used, even if it was property owned by SCASD. And so and what they're doing right now with there's like a temporary committee they're creating right now to figure out what the governance structure should be for the new version of the authority. And that's where that type of issue that you just mentioned will be discussed and determined. And so it'll make a lot more sense in the future than it has in the past. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on then. Okay, so the second thing I just wanted to do an overall reminder that if anybody from the administration or the board has any communication items that you want going from SCASD to the COG, to make sure and just email me, and then I can do that. So I just have to say that every once in a while as a reminder.
And that's the fourth Monday of every month, generally?
I'd have to check. I don't remember. It was last Monday.
Okay.
Correct, the fourth Monday, yeah. And Dr. O'Donnell, I'll try to keep in touch with you before those updates, but, okay, so that was just something I wanted to mention. The third item is that the Center Region Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, the CAP, the General Forum is going to vote on that to accept the resolution on November 22nd. So that's exciting that that's moving forward, and they will vote on that this month, since it's already November. And then also, this is sort of a COVID issue area that I wanted to communicate to the district, the school district. And basically, you all probably realized that fall bulk waste collection was canceled, and then it was reinstated. I think it's a date in December now. And many community members were very unhappy about this. And it seems as though the reason has to do with too many people who would come in to collect the bulk waste either having COVID or having to be in quarantine because of COVID. And so I just thought that I would mention that if we want things like bulk waste collection, we need to think about that in our behavior, and then, of course, our vaccination status. And Mount Nittany Medical Center also gave a report to the COG during the October 19th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting. Mount Nittany Medical Center Executive Vice President Thomas Charles provided an update on COVID at the medical center, and he shared information about the hospital's patient census during the pandemic. And he noted that September and October are the third and fourth highest census counts since the start of the pandemic. And so they asked him, what could the center region do to help? And he said, continued promotion of the COVID vaccine and best practices, such as wearing masks and social distancing, is the best approach. So just another reminder that if we want our trash collected, if we want bulk waste collection, if we want the Mount Nittany Medical Center to have space for us if we have a health issue, then we still need to keep practicing these things. And I think that it's also kind of hard because nationally the cases are getting lower, but locally we're not there yet. So just as a reminder that these are, and then most importantly, because this is for the school district, to keep students in school. Because if we have too many teachers out in quarantine or kids have to be in quarantine, then they're not in school. And our number one goal, of course, is to have them be able to go to school and be in school in person. So just as a reminder. And then the other thing that I thought I would share with you, because our board had discussed it, I think, a month ago, is how the COG is dealing with vaccination of employees, of COG employees. And so I just thought I'd share with you. The General Forum on August 23rd, a motion was passed to strongly encourage the COG executive director to require that COG employees become vaccinated or present proof of vaccination against the virus that is caused by COVID-19, except for those with medical or religious exemptions. After reviewing with agency directors, the executive director concluded that the current combination of vaccines estimated approximately 80% of COG staff are vaccinated, required masking and social distancing is succeeding in keeping staff safe and COVID-19 out of the workplace, and a requirement for vaccination was not needed at the time. And so again, that's sort of where they ended up landing, was that if they could keep it out of the workplace and keep people at work, being able to work, being able to function, then they wouldn't have a mandate. And then they determined they did not need one. On September 1st, the Executive Director and Human Resources Officer met with the Human Resources Committee to discuss the subject. As a result of the discussion, the committee requested staff to further investigate options to increase vaccination levels, including incentives and disincentives, and to bring findings to a special meeting. And I know that our board had also talked about this with the changes with the insurance, and so I just thought that I would share this because it's happening everywhere. It's not just happening amongst what the insurance is going to do with SCASD. It's also every organization is really looking at this, and then also how do we keep it out of the workplace or the schools. And again, it's just a reminder about vaccinating, masking, and social distancing until we can get these case levels down, because we want to have our trash collected. We want to be able to go to the hospital if we need it, and we want to keep our kids in school, and this
Is either here or on Zoom who would like to make a public comment. I need to find my Zoom window too. Was anyone who is here interested in making a comment? Okay. And anyone on Zoom interested in making a comment? Okay. Looks like not this evening. So moving on to routine approvals. I'd be seeking a motion then to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda with the exception of item F.
So moved. Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or questions in regard to routine approval items then? Okay. Any public comment on the routine approvals? All right, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brand?
yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Mr. Leo?
Yes, I think Mr. Hutchinson usually goes before.
Yes,
Got it.
sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Then item F from routine approvals was the physical plant annual service contracts as shown in attachment 5F. If anyone would like to make a motion to approve that item.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions and discussion then. Gretchen?
I have a question. Okay, so this says Sage Resources for the rental of a sound system equipment at Memorial Field in the amount of $3,800. And it says to provide 3 speakers with associated controls and soundboard for the varsity football season. The current system was providing less than acceptable sound at Memorial Field. And this is something that I've heard a lot about from the community, that the sound system is a real problem at Memorial Field. So when I read this, preparing for this meeting tonight, and I saw the $3,800, I'm just wondering what your discussion has been, Randy, and whoever else has been involved with this, about replacing it? Or is this just going to be something that we keep renting and that the school district keeps renting? And then if so, what is the thinking behind how much it would cost? Or I don't know if there's any potential donors, but could you just sort of update us about it?
You bet. And what happened this fall, when we had our first event there this fall, I was there. I called Randy and asked him to fix it. And he did, but it was temporary. So I'll let him speak to, okay, where do we go from here? And I do appreciate what our team did to figure it out on short order, because it's a lot better than, that was a real rough event, because you couldn't hear any announcements. With that said, it was a stopgap. So thanks, Randy.
Right, that's why it's a rental, because it needed to be something that could be accommodated on very short order. And the team will continue to accept feedback from those that are in attendance, from our employee groups and whatnot. And we didn't want to make the commitment to purchase this equipment until we understood if there was any other viable solutions. Because fortunately, we had an off week from home games, and so we were able to get something there. And it was just a deficiency that although the stadium had been, and the sound equipment had been installed, before that, we had never had an opportunity for an event that large to notice that there would be a deficiency there. And because there had been other, maybe some smaller events last spring, but they were not to that extent and had people throughout the stadium as much as what we had had. So we apologize that it was not up to our normal standards, and we just did an alternative here to get us through the fall season, and we'll continue to monitor, and if there needs to be any other purchases, then that would be an action item for you in the future.
So is the current sound system, what's the age of it?
Well, it was brand new.
Oh, it's brand new.
Well, with the renovated stadium, it was brand new, yes. It was just deficient in its capacity to meet all of the needs in the facility.
Like temporarily, or the capacity of the system is insufficient?
It was misunderstood, and it was just a deficiency that we had, and we just didn't realize that it was not scoped out properly.
Okay, even though it's new, it's just, that's not going to work.
Correct.
Got it.
We need to make some additions, and that's what we did.
Uh-huh.
Is we added some equipment to the complement in the facility. It's much better, obviously, and we'll continue to look at whether we can make it even better and what we want to do for a permanent solution.
Okay, so we don't know if, I guess what I'm not understanding is that if it's a rental, then that'll help now, but if it's a deficiency in the system, that the system can't be loud enough, then,
Well, we're using the system that's there. We brought in some more speakers.
Right.
So if it's, I think it was 3 or 4 speakers that we added to the, so.
but they're
if-
rentals.
Correct. We're going to come back with a longer-term solution to the
Okay.
board for action. Yeah,
Got it. Okay,
absolutely.
thank you.
Do you think that would be before graduation then? Like, I think
Oh,
for graduation.
week after graduation.
No, we didn't enjoy this kick me sign. We're not going to do that.
Okay, thank you. Laurel?
Just to clarify then, it's not, is this not on? There you go. Thank you. So it sounds like if this had been during the period when we were still accounting for the contract, this would have been a change order due to need, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Or a design error, yeah.
Right, but it would have, so it's one of those things as opposed to a fault per se in the system itself that might be under warranty or something. It's not that simple.
I believe you're correct.
Okay.
I don't think, I mean, we didn't have to replace the system.
Okay. I just was
To
checking.
make this
Replace
improvement.
anything. We just added additional equipment, and
Right.
I don't know if it was just speakers or not. Vanessa, can you answer that?
Speakers and amplifiers as well.
Okay. And it was not, this was not done by a contractor, this was done in-house.
Okay, thank you.
So there's no, yes, it would, if it had been done by a contractor, it would have been a change order, but it's an additional expense that we need to incur anyways. We just on the fly wanted to rent instead of doing something and not having the time to identify if what we're doing is the right thing.
That makes sense.
Okay?
Thanks for the
Thanks for adding.
clarification.
And that's really helpful. I think I just couldn't ask it in facilities and grounds because we didn't meet, and so I had to ask it here. So anyway, thank you.
It was crystal clear in my backyard. It was really a real improvement.
And you loved hearing that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay, so is there any public comment on this item? Okay, then we will have a roll call vote.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leo?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item A under action items is a motion to approve Allegheny Restoration for work on the Mount Nittany Middle School building envelope as shown in attachment 6A.
So moved.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on this item? Amy?
I just had a, because I wasn't able to be, I don't know if this was at facilities, but, okay, I figured. So my questions were, I was just hoping to get a sense of my assumption is that these kind of issues are a potential problem throughout the entire facade of the building, correct?
Correct.
So we're doing a small section now to assess improvements and things like that. So the thing I don't have a sense of is, this small section represents roughly what proportion of the building? Just trying to think of what the costs for the, if this is the right thing, what the cost would be for the entire effort. Does that make sense?
It does. Mr. Fisher, are you on the meeting tonight?
I am. I can get those numbers for you. I was careful not to put that out there quite yet until we actually did the evaluation to make
Fair
sure
enough.
that, you know, what we're doing, but
I just can gauge like, 2%, or is this more like 20%? Or, I was just trying to think orders of magnitude kind of sense, but I understand if you're not certain.
sure, I can calculate that for you. That won't be a problem if I can get that over to you. My rough guess is it's probably somewhere around 5%.
Okay.
And we did actually go ahead and get some pricing that represent prevailing wage, because if we have to do a large portion of the building, it would be, in that realm. So.
Gotcha, that with an actual cost, got it.
Right, and obviously there's going to be, even though this is a small because it's a small portion, there's still going to be some fixed costs of mobilization and whatnot. So hopefully we'll build economies of scale as we do larger sections. One of the things that Mr. Fisher our facility plant wants to determine is the scope of the work necessary, the timing necessary, and then also trying to map it out, how quickly, it is an appropriate
Right, how urgent we have.
scope of work to schedule it. And yes, understanding the work, the need for it. This is something that, quite honestly, it's not something that was on our radar for this point in time. However, Mount Nittany Middle School is on our radar as far as making sure, and we've talked about this, making sure that we keep that building up and not need a wholesale renovation in the next 5 to 10 years. That we want to be putting some investments in there, just like we did with the HVAC and different parts of the building. So, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's very helpful, and I guess, yeah, it just raises concerns a little bit about, like, if this is going to be effective or not effective, and I know we won't know that till we see how things go.
Correct.
But yeah, this is a bummer issue to face, so
Correct.
thanks.
Yep.
Just, it's
Understood.
not a
Laura?
real professional comment, but,
And my question was just whether these failures are consistent with a building of this age, because it's now 20-plus years old. Is that sort of one of those things that begins to happen when you were talking about maintaining buildings? This is just something that happens as opposed to as a result of poor maintenance up till now, is that?
Mr. Fisher, would you answer that question, please?
This is not ordinary. There is some upkeep needed with any brick building, repointing, recaulking. However, what we're seeing at Mount Nittany Middle is more extreme than that, as far as infiltration and moisture not draining, infiltrating the walls and not draining properly. So this is this is not normal.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. All right, any other, Gretchen?
Well, I just have a question. So I know there's been mold issues in this building, and now, we're dealing with this. Is there sort of, regular air monitoring, just in terms of air quality for the students and staff in the building, since we know that humidity and moisture and mold is a problem in this building, just for safety reasons?
Mike?
We do have humidity monitoring in the building. And as part of this process, we went above ceiling, we went behind walls, to verify that there's there is no nothing hazardous in the building. But we do have humidity monitoring, and we're currently running our HVAC system a little out of the ordinary to try to keep those humidity levels down.
Yeah, and I remember we had asked Mr. Poppert before about air quality monitoring, that's usually something that's done periodically at certain, buildings. I remember we talked about that in the past.
Is this something that's going to be fairly noisy for students while they're in the building?
I think the noise will be kept to a minimum. If there are a few bricks that actually need replaced or reset, so there might be a little bit of noise there. But as far as the recocking, the weather, the ceiling, it should be very minimal.
Okay. The reason I ask is, thinking about the timing for if we need to do the rest of the building, being able to time it over the summer to the extent possible. So,
Sure.
yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. If you'd like to just introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Peter Buck. I live in College Township. Thank you very much. I was just looking a couple of days ago at the mold renovation, the mold clearance that you had to do for Coral Street Elementary School in 2018, which was approximately the same cost, $19,000. And looking at this cost and what might come again, I think that something that Ms. Brandt raised earlier about the climate action and adaptation plan for the region. So if you look at the precipitation record for the Northeast, we have 70% increase in peak events, and we have overall increased precipitation. Hotter air holds more moisture, so things like mold, impact on buildings and their durability, especially when they're in, even though this isn't in a FEMA floodplain, when you look at the basin that building is in, you're going to have more infiltration into the building, say, than incomparable if that building were, say, where Easterly Parkway is or something like that. So I would encourage the board in its future planning, whatever capital improvement plans there are, in whatever renovation cycles there are, to be thinking further ahead on these kind of weather and climate related impacts on the physical infrastructure of the buildings, because it's going to continue, even if it's just this sort of like cut in the budget of like $19,000 here, $25,000 here. Those are going to increase, and so planning for that more in the capital improvement will help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, valid point. We certainly saw that issues with mold, in Mount Etna Middle School 2 or 3 summers ago. That was pretty problematic. So. All right. Any other public comment? Okay. All right, then we will have a roll call vote on this item.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Cesar?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leo?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item B under action is a motion to approve a contract for a Journey to You for psychological services as shown in attachment 6B.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on this item? Any public comment? All right, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Cesar?
Yes.
Mr. Leo?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leo?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item C is a motion to approve recommended IB course title changes as shown in attachment 6C.
Duffy, so moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on this item? Scott?
I had asked a question earlier and appreciate the response from Dr. O'Donnell. I had asked about the 3 additions on the language paragraphs and whether that was indicative of a curriculum change or not, and got confirmation that it was not. So I was just curious whether there was a curriculum change or not. Interestingly, in reading through that, and I'm not really familiar at all with the IB program, but I saw the IB Theory of Knowledge section and saw that it was a required course for all IB students, and gee, that would be an interesting required course for all high school students
Yeah.
because it talks about, how to approach conflict and how to, critically think with an open mind and things like that. So I just think that that would be an interesting course, for others to take as well. So that's it. Thanks.
I agree, and something I'd heard from people in the community who were familiar with the IB program, from other, having lived in other districts, or, their kids or themselves having, been involved with the program elsewhere, was that particular course was they thought was one of the best things about the IB program, was the way that course really, prepares students for, the complexity of college level academic work, as well as, just being able to be engaged citizens, so. Yeah. So anyways, other questions on the IB courses?
Question.
Jim?
Are the language, like, it says French 4 and 5, are those co-seated with our French 4 and 5 for the other
And
courses?
I see Chris and Jen online, and Chris is nodding, so go ahead, Chris.
They are. The IB updates the curriculum for courses on a 6-year cycle, very similar to the way AP does it. So to answer Scott's question, it's a slight change in curriculum. It's not a complete overhaul. They usually add a topic. They might remove a topic and add a different topic, very similar to what College Board does. Jen, do you want to talk more about the co-seating and language, since that's really close to your area?
Sure. We typically co-seat the IB language classes with our advanced and AP courses because the content is so similar. While the assessments may differ slightly, teachers are able to manage that differentiation with students. And having both of those courses together, I think, helps to boost our language numbers as well, because language is required in the IB.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Other questions on this topic? All right. Is there any public comment? Okay, then we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro.
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney. Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Liddell.
Yes.
Ms. Brant.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Then we'll be moving on to information discussion. And item A is the mental health supports update. I'd like to recognize Jean Canals and Curtis Johnson to provide an update on the district's mental health supports for students.
And Jean's with us remotely, and obviously CJ's with us. So we had a conversation in CCL, and we wanted, this was a question we received from several board members in regard to all the moving parts together, so to speak, because there had been some different board actions that supported our work moving forward. So Jean, CJ, and the team pulled this together, and we had a conversation in CCL. So Jean and CJ, do you want to share an overview? And then Dan, if you want to share any reflections from the CCL discussion that you want to add, and we'll open it up to questions.
Sure, I can go, Curtis, if that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Right. So like Bob said, a request was made to kind of put together what we were doing for students and staff related to mental health. We've been tracking this for about 5 to 7 years right now. We know we've made some gains over the years, but we feel COVID, we probably have lost some of that ground. So we've increased those services quite considerably, I think, over the past year. So just to give you a brief overview, when we talk about the mental health for students focus and the increase in staffing, we now have a full-time counselor in every building. We hired a social worker full-time, and we've increased our psychologists in the district to 11 full-time school psychologists. As far as the support services for students, we have the MOU with PSU to provide her clinic supervisor to support our mental health interns to work with our students. That number is at 11 now. We meet every Friday. Referrals are made through counseling, and those referrals are triaged every Friday to identify the intern to take them. The good news, that system's working really well. The bad news is everyone's about full already, so we really want to track that carefully. We're utilizing Mental Health Matters Foundation money for K-12 promotional mental health awareness, integrated mental health consultation at each team, at building level teams for their MTSS. We have also have our LSW, which is our licensed social worker and our homeschool visitor, continue to work on needs assessments and fundraising needs with SCASD's Education Foundation. They have implemented a food pantry partnership with the food bank. They provide supports, facilities, connection, resources, and families. These needs assessments that they share with staff and families really provide them with the groundwork for what they need to give to families and help with them with that facilitation. They usually look to outside providers and hook them up with all kinds of services in the community, and then we look to our own resources to help to support them. We hired the mental health therapist this summer, and she is working towards her LPC, working closely with Triage Chatters as her supervisor for that. She's providing individual therapy. She manages our referrals for mental health interns. She's been doing group work. She really hit the ground running and has been doing an amazing job. We have the computer-based social emotional learning for our BASC 3, which we do every spring and fall. Last year we implemented that K-12. We had parents screen their children from K-3. We did self-assessments for students 4th through 12th, and then teachers did K-5. This year we're doing teachers K-5 and students self-screen 4th through 12th grade. We are seeing about a 3% increase in our yellow and red, which is elevated social emotional needs. So we're working closely on that. We have our equity office, which has identified 3 local providers to help support our students for our significant disproportionality numbers. Our mental health student focused curriculum, we have implemented second step in the classrooms K-8. We have teachers doing that at the K-5 level and at the middle school level. And we have the culturally responsive practices happening throughout our curriculum. For staff support services, we do have our MRLU with PSU. They help provide, those interns also can work with staff. We have self-care presentation, trauma-informed straight talk focus, and then we have the EAP for SCASD staff. Our mental health staff professional development, you can see we have equity-based trauma-informed care. And we are moving forward with restorative practices again this year. We have school-wide positive behavior intervention and supports happening K-12 with an emphasis this year on the high school to get that rolling a little bit more aware in the building. We have our suicide awareness training happening throughout the district, throughout every year, and we have our safe to say numbers, which we have been used quite frequently. We've had a significant number of safe to say calls this year. So we meet regularly and work together and really try to triage these, and hopefully we're currently taking the PAYS survey right now for 2021. Our last survey was done in the fall of 2019, and we received that data the fall of 2020, which is during the pandemic. So that data really we're not feeling is a good representation of where our students were at the time. So we're hoping this data from the 21 will give us a nice idea of what we lost, if we lost any gaps, and where we need to go with that. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And thanks, Jean. I don't have anything to add really relative to all the review that Jean just provided. One of the things that occurred though, actually during the planning and goal setting today for the counseling program, one of the things that was clarified in that discussion today was about the means by which the students who, I should say, the services available through the interns, how they're made available and how the decisions are made in terms of the referrals to these interns and how that's managed. And Jean, you can explain this in greater detail, but there's a weekly triage meeting basically involving the counselors and equity staff and others who are attentive to the needs of the students, who discuss the possible referrals and that this is done in a systematic fashion.
Correct. I think we service over 60 students already with that process. It's pretty flawless. It's color coded and everyone knows what they're doing when they leave there. They do phone screens and they jump on the cases, and it's a nice way to remove barriers and also to triage before it gets to the integrated mental health team. So they kind of take the high stakes cases, but this helps us get those students that are just struggling with coming back to school and with some of those lower level areas.
Another thing that I seem to notice, or at least seemed to be important, was the blending of earlier systems, like the integrated mental health program, blending with the intern and the PLC, the professional counselor who's overseeing the work. Just there's a blending of earlier systems and newer systems in a way to make them function well together.
I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Gene Canales and Saria Chatters for all they're doing to lead these initiatives and meeting the social-emotional needs of our students and employees. They're doing a fantastic job. So.
Yeah, and I know we gave them extra work in putting together this summary. So I appreciate the effort that went into that, because I think it does help us paint a nice full picture, both for us and for the community, about the numerous ways that you're attacking these problems. So I think it's really helpful to see it all in one place and realize how substantial those efforts really are. So
It's actually helpful to me too. I could kind of put it all up on the spot, and then I can just build from there, right?
Right. Well, and one of the things in my experience, at least, and perhaps in our experience, is that as we consider each of these initiatives, and where we in different meetings will approve different parts of the puzzle, but we don't get a chance to see the puzzle assembled. And this is an opportunity to see the mental health support systems all in one place and integrated. Thank you. Thank you for your hard work.
Laurel?
Yes, thank you for the work. This is more of a process type of comment, I guess. And I know I've mentioned it before, but I wanted to mention again, it's helpful when we get a memo like this, I think, for the community as well as other board members. Since we share committee assignments, we don't all go to all the different committees, we can't. To actually include on the updated memo when it comes to the board, some of the discussion. For instance, we talked at CCL about where we stood with respect to the recommended number of personnel per student in the district. We're doing okay. And that would be good information to have on here. It is, some of it, at least the topics are in the minutes, but there were some answers provided and updates. We also talked about the impact on community services. We had some discussion of the funding, and that some of it is coming from the sort of more one-time money, and that we may have to look at what we continue and not. And it would be nice to see some of that, whether it's a FAQ or whatever. I don't want to micromanage how that gets added, but that those pieces, after something's gone through committee, get put into the report that comes to the full board and the community. So that's what I mean by a process thing, as opposed to a specific question.
I mean, if we can, what we can put in the notes, if the board directs us to type up another report, that's fine. But I mean, there are notes, you have people that your colleagues within the committee you can ask questions of. That wasn't the intent of the report. If we're going to need to document every question we're asked, that's another assignment. I mean, I'm just being upfront with you, Laurel. I mean, you see the tip of the iceberg of what we're asking people to do. So, with all due respect.
Yeah, and this agenda item this evening is essentially is carried over from CCL, and I think the discussion that we had was helpful. It was substantive, and we certainly can, if the questions can be repeated, or if there are other questions that might emerge. I mean, that's all good. I mean, it just enriches our understanding. So I think the fact that that this agenda item this evening and the initial documentation conforms to the presentation in CCL, given the fact that it was only a week ago. I think that and not much substantively has changed, except for the addition of the action item this evening for the additional services. I'd be curious to see how that fits into the picture. But short of that, I'm not sure.
And we're trying we're talking about what data we can accumulate for you, so that, you know, what's the impact, what's happening, how many IMH referrals do we get, what's coming out of all the universal screening for social emotional needs of students. So we are trying to you know, pull that together, so that, you know, what do we continue, what do we try to continue, like Laurel said, we know some of this relates to ESSER funds, which we've talked about before. So what happens at the end of that process too? So we're trying to manage the evidence so that we can keep track of it ourselves, so that, you know, what do we need to figure a way to keep doing moving forward if it's an evidence need, as well as, you know, are we making an impact? Can any of our partners pick up any of that? We know that some of our partners are really struggling, as Jean said earlier, about capacity. That plays into it as well. And I think our IMH team does include many community partners too, so we are up to speed with what they're doing and how their capacity is. So, Jean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that. I know that we've chatted about that.
I will clarify for Dan about the Journey to You and what we plan to do with that, and that's mostly for the Little Lions Lounge to use after school. And we do have in there, if they can, in fact, take cases, because I know that if you're full capacity, that we would have individual students be seen by them.
And that's a practice of professional counselors, from looking up their website. And there's a significant number on staff there.
Correct. Right. They do have some staff that do not take insurance, and so that would be an increased price on that, and that may be where we could tap into resources there, because mostly ones that accept insurance are at capacity.
Miriam?
Thank you so much for that report. It was really wonderful work that you're doing around mental health. But I think one thing that we have to consider is to keep reminding students that they have all of these wonderful resources. I know we do it at the beginning of the year, we do it occasionally throughout the year when we have long homerooms. But one thing that we have to look at is through all levels, reminding students, whether it be every month, that they have these resources available.
Talk right in the microphone.
That they have these resources available to them. And I think it is really, really important to make sure that the students are aware, whether it be an email every month or maybe on the announcements throughout all the schools in the district. So I think it's really important.
Yeah. Agreed. And like how they can get access.
Exactly.
Right. I did have a question in terms of, you know, like how insurance works with this. I was only able to be there for part of the CCL discussion about it. So if it seems like, because, you know, it's a real challenge being able to get into mental health care providers that necessarily, like, you know, that accept your insurance. So like, so often you find that you're, you know, you may be constrained by, you know, who accepts your insurance versus other insurances, and some that don't accept insurance at all. So it's certainly like a real benefit to community members to, you know, for students to be able to access services through the district like this. But then how does it work with insurance? Like, so if, are you billing, is insurance billed if a student's family has insurance that would cover it and they're going through a school-based provider? Like,
So if they are going through integrated mental health, if they're going through a provider that is school-based outside of the district, they manage all the insurance. They do that all on their end. We don't do any kind of insurance. At some point, we may discuss being able to do insurance processing for our mental health clinician, but that can't be until she is licensed.
okay, good to know. All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. This was really helpful to be able to see this all in one place like this. Yeah.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks, EJ.
Thank you. All right, then moving on to item B, under information discussion, we'll be looking at district strategic priorities for 2021, 2022. And this is really a follow-up to the work session we had last week to review the results, you know, of the feedback that board members provided, you know, as we worked in small groups, so we didn't have a full group discussion last Monday. So this is the opportunity for that full group discussion and to review sort of the results, you know, of all the feedback that our colleagues provided to the administration's proposed goals for this academic year. So I think it might be helpful to, you know, if we could, as individuals looking at these, the feedback that came from board members, if, you know, if we're able to kind of identify some of the common themes or, you know, items that come up from a number of board members so that we can kind of, because we really want to be able to provide some feedback in terms of where the board, a majority of the board or the board as a whole would like to provide feedback to the administration. So to the extent that we might be able to focus on that, I think would be helpful. And then, any questions that, we might have about feedback that others provided or about the items within the administration's list as well.
Amber, when we looked at we went through the feedback, and there's no doubt we thought we saw some common feedback around health, safety, and well-being, which we've had a lot of discussion at the board table. Obviously, the board's taken some actions to help us move some partners forward, to help support us, as well as, it was mentioned by Jean, the clinician position as well.
Right.
There was some discussion of, how that position came about, because we did look to our partners for capacity and they didn't have it, and we had a decision point as a district to make, and what we're seeing behaviorally, and the clinician is pretty busy, and we're also overseeing that pretty closely, since it is based in Saria's, where her office is located as well. The other big area, I thought there was some common feedback related to learning loss, and we don't know everything yet, but our faculty is dealing with a wide range of student experiences coming to them. Obviously, we didn't get to give them our full curricular experience last year, and now students moved along, and our faculty's got to deal with that, and so they're dealing with more varied readiness than ever before, with students coming into their classes who typically have a full year of exposure to a planned curriculum experience during that prior year. And I also saw coincidentally a note that our elementary leadership team put out to the faculty around some flexibility this year, because teachers are struggling meeting the needs of students and moving forward in a manner that they typically do as a team with their curriculum. So what we wanted to see happen was to make sure they understood they had some flexibility and put it in writing, so they don't feel like covering curriculum is what it's all about this year. We're not going to make everything right in the core classroom in 1 year. It just can't happen. So hence you see all the extra tutoring that we have, at all levels, looking at the expanded summer school. Obviously that involves some of our students who really need more experiences. So, but anyways, back to the purpose of this, I do think those were two big areas that I saw, and also heard from some individuals. And since we've had a discussion about a lot of them, there was no surprises. I hope some of you said that to me. There's nothing new here, because we've been living this. And I think for where we are with the pandemic, I think we're biting off a pretty good bit, but I think it's, the priorities, we're trying to put them in the right areas that we need. And I hope the board's proud of that, because you've been part of it. How we manage it this year and prioritize your time for updates to you, I think was one thing that I added to the memo, just to, if there's some feedback there. But I think to your point, I think those are two big areas that jumped out at me, and I'll take notes on the rest.
Yeah, I agree. That was, the things that I had written down were learning loss and social emotional needs as, repetitive, many people kept coming back to those. I had given the feedback that, when we look at all of these priorities across all of these areas, that, for me as one individual, that learning loss and the social emotional needs of students as a result of all the disruption of the past year and a half, like those would be my top priorities in terms of what we focus on this year. And I would want to be very cautious about adding any other goals this year that might detract from the time and attention available to attend to those needs, because of the urgency of students' needs at this time, and knowing how significant of a focus and time commitment this needs to take from our staff. So with that, just being mindful of not getting too creative with what else we might be interested in accomplishing.
Well, I think for me, and I think for other board members, that was one thing that kind of crystallized in our discussions with the administrative team was not just the ongoing pressures of meeting social emotional needs this year, but really kind of solidified the realization that we need to start scaffolding a plan for the next 2 to 5 years in terms of, like you're saying, catching up, that learning loss isn't going to happen within 1 year. We may need to be ready to make adjustments for students, for a cohort of students potentially over a period of a couple years in order to both meet those social emotional needs and also deal with academic pressures. So, yeah, I mean, it was good and bad. It was a little bit sad and disheartening to think that, that there's groups of kids that will need just totally different experiences moving through the next several years of their time in school, but also, I think helpful for us as a board to realize, we have repercussions to deal with in a significant way for quite a stretch of time moving forward.
Laura?
Yeah, one of the things that had come up over the course of the evening that I think got clarified in different places was what parking lot meant in terms of that, because I initially, and in the first group I was in, we were thinking of it as in things that maybe don't get done this year, but we don't want to forget about.
Oh, that's what I used it for.
But then other places, it was things that we wanted, say, in future years that we knew we wouldn't get to, like the middle school review being one, that it's not that we've forgotten about it, so just remembering that it's still in this stack. So as people, I think there's a mixture of things in that, under that parking lot term. And certainly the middle school review is an example of something that we all think is important. It's very unfortunate that it got interrupted. At the same time, given the scope of the issues day to day, to try to then take staff time as well as community and board time, this year is just, we couldn't give it what it was due. And I think there was, my sense is we all agreed on that. But we also know we want to get to it.
Yep.
And then there are some that were in between. One of the ones that occurred to me that I hope we'll be hearing more from the administration on, because that will determine how urgent it is the attendance areas. And that's going to have to come from administration in terms of what they're seeing in the buildings. That's something that if we could put it off, sure, it'd be great not to try to add that in this year, but if we need to, we need to, so.
Yeah. And clearly, we're not in our own boardroom right this evening. So,
just as one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right.
Lori?
I first want to say that I thought that the process last week was great. I thought that it gave us all an opportunity to speak very specifically with the administrators who were stationed at each place, and then to sort of bounce ideas off of one another in a nice conversational way that didn't feel overwhelming. So I thought that that was a really useful process. So
Great.
just to put a pin in that. And then the second thing is I walked away feeling confident that the areas that Dr. O'Donnell and Amber, that you highlighted related to learning loss and mental health and social emotional learning, that those will be taken care of through an equity lens. In both the health and safety and the academic stations, I guess, that came up a lot, that, we're not leaving behind, the equity lens is going to be the lens with which we look at all of these COVID effects. And so I felt really good about those conversations, and knowing that the prioritization that we have placed there isn't going to be lost in this effort. So that was really comforting to
Laura, I
me.
appreciate that. I know Danielle did the overview of the MTSS work, and the old response to instruction, it's not that old, I'm old. The response to instruction and intervention to try to get kids who are struggling in a classroom what they need quickly. I think the MTSS model looks to, the social, emotional, behavioral needs of a student, because the faculty members they're seeing everything. And so that's where the supports need to be ready to go, because that's where students live. I mean, they live with our teachers. So I think that's, something we're not doing quickly, but we're working toward that piece. So I appreciate you recognizing that, because I think that'll be, we have to take it slow, and I think that's a multi-year transition for us, so that all the things that are happening actually can focus on getting in place more quickly for kids that need it.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Well, I think, I also noticed that, I want to recognize that some of the equity work and some earlier mental health work that we had already been in process doing prior to the pandemic has really shown me how appreciative I am of the people who were working on those and thought we're putting those in place before we face these obstacles. Because I think, while we still have a lot to do to help kids, we are definitely in a better place than we might have been had the pandemic hit 2 to 3 years prior, like when I first came on the board. Not saying we were doing a horrible job then, but like, you know, there's a lot of things that we've put into place over the last 2 to 4 years that really has helped provide a foundation to help us cope with what we're dealing with now. So, so there's been a lot of forethought by some people, I think, to have us in a place that gives us at least some resiliency to build upon, even though we need more providers in our community.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, those community-wide resources that we're facing, but I appreciate some of the ground level stuff that's already been put in place.
Another piece that I saw, you know, in a number of different comments was, you know, emphasizing the support for the restorative practices approach and wanting to see that be successful. And then, you know, I guess one of the questions I had was, you know, how we're, like, what we need to do to make sure we're able to implement this approach with fidelity and to measure, you know, the success of this approach as well, and getting some feedback from staff perhaps on, you know, where they see this going and you know, what they need in terms of support or professional development to be able to implement this successfully. Because it seems to me like it's a change in classroom management perhaps, it's a change in, you know, I'm not saying that it replaces the positive behavioral support systems that have been sort of the prevailing paradigm in, you know, how we're handling behavioral issues in schools, but it's, you know, it's really it's a shift in mindset from, you know, this sort of reward and punishment approach to a more in a place in which we're able to like really engage students and build community, and that it's students' connection with students and building students' connection with each other and community, as opposed to using, you know, a series of carrots and sticks. So, Lori?
I actually was chatting with Jean Knaus and Curtis Johnson about that very idea, and, you know, how do we know that how we're doing on this? And they offered some really thoughtful ideas about that, and, you know, what the shift will look like for them. And so I think it might be really useful for the board to hear a conversation just about that. Like, how do you know that this is doing what we want it to do? And they have thought about all of that.
Oh,
so,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Laura?
Well, that's one of the questions that I had moving forward from Monday night, last Monday, is what we're doing, whether there are plans to develop from these things to have some actual goals. So whether that would be a goal that then, you know, under the goals will be action steps that we can, and sometimes goals can't get met for whatever reasons, but at least we know it was one, and then we know what needs to be done. So is there a plan for coming back with actual goals for the year, or are we leaving? So what happens now, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, I had put in there as far as monitoring, but these aren't goals. We have goals in our strategic plan, so we're not looking to make more goals. These are actual actions that are happening in the district that align to those long-term goals. So when we have the strategic plan update, I think clarifying the measures is what I've shared. I'm going to talk with CCL and then come to the full board with a process piece related to that. But I think in regard to all the different actions happening in the district, I think one question for you is, what do you want to see? And I had mentioned to you in regard to the social emotional actions that we're doing, how do we know how it's going with the students? So that's why we're trying to figure out what data should we be logging. Even I was speaking with our bilingual family outreach person, and she was asking me, well, what data should I be? So she and Jonathan Klingeman have been talking about, well, what should she be logging so that, you know, what has she been doing with families and students to help them? And she's pretty much logging everything, but we also don't want to waste her time. So as we look at each of the initiatives that we're working on and rolling out right now, those are some of our conversations, and I think that would be helpful to, you know, when we do share updates with the board, be able to give you some data and then see what questions you have of us. So timing those out with you with your respective committees. Obviously, when you look at learning loss and the whole health, safety, and well-being, not to lump it all on CCL, but when you look at where this aligns with your organizational structure and then running it through the full board, I think it seems logical. I mean.
Laura? Just to follow up on that, one of the things we've talked about over the past few years is how so often when the state talks about goals, it's all standardized test driven. And that seems to be the only data that counts. And so I think part of what you were saying, which I appreciate, is that some of the data may not be, there's this standardized test, but part of what distinguishes us as a district and what I think is important, and we can really be a leader in our state because our test numbers are fairly good, is in saying these are the other things that school do, and it's data, it's a different type of data. But really thinking exactly what you were saying, what do we want to be able to say and move from that is not just a standardized test-based way of thinking of data and progress in a school district, because a lot of this is progress. It may or may not show up on an end-of-year test in biology.
Yeah.
But it's important. It's very important.
And I think that jives, Laura, with why we wanted to do a strategic plan that was more than simply the state's comprehensive plan back when they first rolled it out. Now their system has changed, and Lynn's trying to, well, CJ and Lynn are both trying to help me understand it. And so that when we give you a process update, that we don't forget why we did that. And because this matters so much, I think when you look at our first goal of our plan, the measures that jive with that, I think we want to hone in on those, and that's where we want to move the needle. And this year might be a sort of a baseline year because some of these data points we haven't had in the past. But to your point, where do we go from here? I think we definitely need to share updates with the board as we move through the year. We've spoken about several of these. And I think as we plan agendas for the full board and committees, you know, the committee chairs have to play into that and, you know, and map that out, because if we expect something, you know, we need to take a look at it and keep it on the table. So I think to the point of not adding additional things, whoever weighed in with that, that's a good point, because if we really mean this, then we need to stay the course. And to the point of restorative practices, again, that's the core classroom teachers. And, you know, I don't think it's a quick process because you went through a half-day training or a couple half-days training. You know, I think our teachers have built community by and large across the district to a high degree. I think some of the tools in there, you know, if a teacher walks out of that training, because I did the 2-day training myself, if you come out with a couple tools to help you build community a little bit more, you know, I don't think we want to rewire everything they've been doing in every classroom. I think it's let them make the decisions, what they take from the training to help build community. And then also when a kid makes a mistake, because they will, I think it really helps them to get back on track quicker, and also be part of the solution maybe a little bit more than they might have been in the past, you know. So I'm not sure how to take updates on that, because you're talking 650 faculty.
Right.
But we should come back to that. And I think Jean and Saria and CJ and our team can help us, because they're better apt to than me. So.
Okay. Great.
So to add on to Bob's point, I'm very impressed and very encouraged by the commitment that the district's making towards the idea of restorative practices. And to Bob's point about how teachers are working at the idea of how do I create community, it just strikes me that one of the things, kind of to Laurel's point here is, if we're talking about significant measures, one of the things we could be doing is really measuring the sense of community that students and faculty members feel. Do we feel part of something bigger? Do we feel part of a community here? Do we feel, what's the word I'm looking for? That I'm part of something. I'm not an outsider.
Connection.
And we could, there are measurements we could do to do that. And I think that would probably give, it's going to be a process. This is going to be something that's not going to be a one-year
Right.
project. It's going to be a 5 or
Well,
10-year project.
We
But
are-
that shift.
We are looking at whether we, use parts of the prior survey we used, the state's doing something with school climate, but it can't be from a top-down
Right.
corporate feel. It has to be
Absolutely.
coming from the bottom up, so to speak. It has to come from the classroom. And so I think talking to the faculty about how that's going and what, utilizing our principles and, what supports do we need, typically it's, a lot of times it's more time and supports for challenges that are going on at the classroom.
One of the things someone I've worked with in the past has talked about when we get this kind of data, that it's not a scalpel, it's a flashlight, and that so people are not intimidated by the information we get. Okay, we're not blaming, no one's at fault here. No one's being criticized. It's a light to say, well, this is where we are, and this is where we need to go, and so that we look at this data in a way that's not critical of people. I think that's an important thing going forward. The other thought, if I can find it, is big part of this, I think, and especially as we get to higher grades, is tapping into the sense of students want to feel they're making a contribution to something that's bigger than themselves. And as we move forward eventually into rethinking the middle school model, I think these pieces go together. The idea of a sense of community and a sense of the fact that I can make a contribution. And so to what extent are we thinking, I love one of the reasons I'm so impressed and in favor of the IB program is that course that was brought up earlier today. Those kinds of skills, how intentional are we as a community beyond just IB in terms of developing the kind of skills that are going to allow kids, well, how do I make a difference? How do I talk to people that think differently than I do, that have different values than I have? How do I have conversations that incorporate that into creating something that we can all live with and move us forward? And so doesn't sound, that to me, this is me, but that's kind of a core mission of education. And by the way, those are the kinds of skills that these kids are going to find useful 10 and 20 years from now when they're out in the real world, because everything else is going to be automated, so how do I actually solve real problems? And so, it seems a little bit high-minded, but, how are we creating the next generation of change agents? How are we giving them the skills to make a difference in whatever community they're in, and be intentional about it, and realize that's a process, that's okay, but establishing this is where we want to go. This is the goal that we have.
I would argue that's happening in our classrooms at this time.
then that's
People
great.
are giving kids respectful tasks, and kids are working together through tough stuff with kids who
So
don't
the
have
question is
same-
then, to what extent do the kids feel a sense of ownership about it? I'm doing this because not because the teacher says I have to, but because this is of value to me.
Miriam?
One thing about IB, since we were talking about that a bit more, is the importance of having a global perspective throughout. And that's one thing that's really interesting about IB, is that how the curriculum is the same all throughout the world. And so through IB, you can certainly gain a lot of different leadership tools that students can take with them into their future careers. And I think that's definitely something that we can explore more through middle school and even elementary school programs. Is definitely building those standard leadership skills that students can take with them throughout, and even use them in high school, maybe becoming an officer in a club or getting involved in student government. And I think those are some really key leadership skills that we can definitely work towards incorporating in our curriculum.
Scott?
Couple quick, I wasn't able to attend the meeting last Monday, so I definitely appreciate this write-up from a summary standpoint, and there were just two things I wanted to touch on. One being, not that there aren't many priorities, but two that stuck out to me was one being staffing shortages. And, that's one where we simply can't afford to get behind on that. I mean, it's an infrastructure. It's no different than buildings from the standpoint of if you fall behind, trying to catch back up is going to be a Herculean task. So staffing, again, I think that's going to be a key element, moving forward. And it certainly doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon.
You're right. Did you see in the HR report, I believe there were 14 substitutes you approved tonight. There were 26 faculty substitutes who registered after you took your action within the week of when you took it. So I know Fallon Cruz is working feverishly to onboard those folks and connect them with principals to help us out. So that's not the only area, because the bus driver world, as you know, CAT is struggling, and they're providing really great incentives, unfortunately. So that's having an impact on us as well. So it's not the only area, but Scott, it is a major point for the year, absolutely.
And then the other area that I just wanted to briefly comment on was, we talk about learning loss, and that's obviously very significant and something we have to address. But I think we also need to try to figure out how we take the good that we learned from in the last 18 months and how do we maintain that and apply that. Because there are some number of students out there who really thrive in that environment, in that hybrid-ish kind of environment. And I'm not saying it was easy. It wasn't easy for families, it wasn't easy for teachers, et cetera, but there are some kids out there that really thrived in that. And how do we assess, not losing that opportunity for kids, because it wasn't really, it's not virtual, it's not the virtual academy where you're all remote, it was that kind of, it was the hybrid, and it was a challenge, but boy, some kids really took to it, and I think did much better than they might have otherwise, because they had that opportunity. So I'm just using that as an example of there are probably many things within operations, whatever, that it's like, gee, when you look outside of our little universe here and into the business world, there are going to be very few companies that go back to 5 days, 8 hours a day, 40 hours in the office, et cetera. And you look up on the hill back there, and they're not going to be like that. Big Blue's not going to be like that anytime soon. So there are going to be lots of things that are going to change long term, and some of them are going to be really beneficial, I think, to whether it's workers, students, whatever it might be. So it's about capturing kind of that kind of stuff as well.
We did kind of talk not so much about not physically being present or using hybrid technology approaches, but I do think a theme in my group, and I saw it in the comments from the other groups, was certainly about the evaluation of what adjustments did we make during last year for COVID that we need to think about doing more long-term. And so some examples of that was some of the flexibility in grading, or some of the alterations in homework. I don't want to say due dates, but that there was windows of opportunity for students to get assignments in, that some teachers approached how they scheduled assignments somewhat different through COVID. And at least I know from the board perspective, there were many comments, in those suggestions and thoughts about, which of those do need to potentially or would benefit students, because those shifts and flexibility changes really benefited some students in terms of being able to do it. I know for my ADHD kiddos, those vague, large windows don't work very well because they need a sense of urgency. But for a lot of other kids, it was really important. So, and I know from the administration side, like the homework policy was on their list of policies for secondary to talk about. So those are opportunities we have to kind of revisit some of those things that we used during the worst parts of the early part of the pandemic and how they benefit students.
Yeah, and even
I think just to share, we did talk about some of those other aspects, and whether they need to be in place, both for the social emotional reasons that students are still facing, and just overall, like for some students, it was really beneficial to have that different approach.
Well, and even, I don't mean, when I say little, I don't mean trivial, but even little things like, gee, I'll bet you we've had a lot more sick days this year than we had last year, because you actually can't go to school and you can't remote in and you can't be hybrid. And oh, by the way, there's probably more quarantine days because of the same thing, and we're not even into snow season, so, snow days, et cetera. So it's just kind of little, not trivial, but smaller things like that, it'd be nice if we could figure out how to integrate and learn from that, just as an example. So that's it, thanks.
And I think, to your point about that business is not going back to the way things were, and, not entirely. And, online education is going to play a role in these kids' lives, not just potentially in college, but many of them will probably take some online courses in college. So having a way to like dip a toe into that is probably going to be in the best interest of many kids going forward. And, that may be how they get their master's degree, or it might be how they do continuing education. So, once they're into their career. So, I think having some of those experiences in high school is probably, really, a helpful skill for them to build. And then if they're, in a, kind of an office kind of work space, they might find that, is not necessarily going to be a 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And getting used to working at home a little bit, it's probably, and it can, what are the opportunities that opens up in terms of, like greater flexibility or getting some coursework in during the summer, and, that it changes, not just, that we don't just have the school day now and those limitations of space and time, but we can provide kids with programming potentially that, is much more flexible, so.
Speaking of, we have flexible instructional days approved for this year from the state. We hope to not use them. We applied because, just in case we have a bad winter, I can tell you if we have snow that goes over, say, let's just say 8 or 10 inches, I would never advise that the superintendent ever calls a remote day on that day. That was the worst call, I think, of my career, because that was the greatest snowstorm we've had in 10 years. So I apologize to anybody who remembers that. But for icy days and all that, yeah, sure, Scott, I do agree. There's, especially if we're faced with, the cut point, so to speak, is to mid-June or whenever, when, teachers are trying to educate students in June and seniors have graduated, and that's a real difficult chore when you look at the value of a day. But we haven't mapped anything out for this year that includes remote. We only put that into the state as a safety net in case we run into bad weather. We know we have some snow days in the calendar. But I to your bigger points of longer term, I don't disagree, and I'm not so sure we have everything ironed out with what is the most valuable thing we've learned, because we're really not out of it just yet. And to Amy's point, we did put some things on pause. When we did the student day, we said, hey, we asked the board to not force us to do the secondary homework policy at the time, so we never clarified it. It's pretty old.
Yep.
So we put that on pause, and I just didn't want us to forget some of the things we put on pause over the years, and because I think they are important for learning, to really identify what is best practice for our school community there. Are we there, or should it be something different? So.
Yeah. And I think, with thinking of what Miriam had mentioned about the role that, students can play in terms of being, officers at clubs and, these other kind of leadership opportunities, to the extent that homework can, like how much homework is appropriate when we also want to make sure students are able to take advantage of so many other after-school opportunities that we're providing for them.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, no, one of the things is that obviously in this, we have to keep our, goals in mind, right? And like you said, Bob, we're not coming up with new goals, but we're coming up, how do we achieve those goals? And what are the priorities, 6 months, a year, or what needs to be put in the parking lot till we can better deal? We either have the capacity to deal with it or the time to deal with it. The other thing about is, to some of the things that David said, one of our goals is about, preparing students for a purposeful life. And I think that's exactly what you were talking about in terms of that. So what steps do we take now that will help put that in place? And then how do we measure that? When you talk about your goals from the same, from the state point of view, I mean, really that's about measurement, not not really goals. I mean, say a goal to, make sure every student is above average or whatever, the Lake Wobegon goals. But what can we measure now and what are the right instruments for that? So we talked about mental health matters is a survey the right, or is it, doing sort of a discussing it with the counselors? What are you seeing? What are you seeing more of? Are you seeing less of this since we put these interventions in place? Those type of measurements, I think, will help us gauge the success of those priorities going forward. Somebody call them OKRs or KPIs, key performance indicators, but we should set some of those along with these priorities. How do we measure these? How do we know that what we're doing, what interventions we're taking, what curriculum changes, how do we know that they're making a difference, and how can we measure that? So that's something that I think we have to think on as a little bit of follow-up to this work. But I think the session last week was very helpful in terms of setting what are things that we can do short-term or within the year that will get us closer to these goals. And I think it was very valuable in that regard.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else on this tonight?
I guess one of the reflections as I was reading before the session last week and going through the three major headings, the three categories, one of the things that occurred to me was recognizing that there were trends that popped up in each of the three category areas, in two in particular, the health and safety piece and on the learning piece. There were references to the importance of building community. And we talked about this prior to this, so I don't think I have anything to add, other than to say that my response to the task was to take into account the circumstance which we find ourselves, or our students find themselves, given the disruption in their social lives and their academic lives in the last year and a half, and trying to restore normalcy to their experience as much as possible, trying to renew the relationships that would have occurred and under normal circumstances without being separated every other day or without having to go remote. There are a variety of ways in which kids kind of lost contact, if you will, from their peers and from their educational leaders and their teachers in the schools. So to the extent that we can renew that and restore it, and with obviously the restorative practices, restorative circles and those programs help with that. But another thing that comes to mind as I was reviewing the materials was the importance of working together in a systematic way through the multi-tiered systems of support, which is a way in which you can collaboratively bring together expertise within a school that's centered around the needs of a student within a classroom, but involves working together across professional roles in a collaborative way, in a respectful way that takes into account a higher order understanding of a student's needs. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of the way we work, I think that multi-tier system of support tool or program, I think, can really help us stay on track by setting goals, by working collaboratively with families, by working collaboratively and providing support to classroom teachers. I think it's a means by which we can determine need, set goals, measure progress, and move forward, and to do this involving a whole team of individuals, all centered on the needs of a student in the school. And those needs, as the summary, the summary in the summary that was provided to us indicates, it's about a variety of needs that students might have, but among them were questions about economic advantage and disadvantage, and also in terms of their marginalization. We have to keep in mind that sometimes kiddos can just have needs that are based on differences in their economic and social advantage relative to others. And so I think the MTSS program itself, I think, can be really effective in directing our efforts, measuring progress, determining need, and assessing how students, through the tools they use for screening, assessing the improvements that students are making in their programs. So, I mean, those are my takeaways from reviewing that, and those are the things I wanted to add in our planning last week during the work session.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, thank you. Okay, anything else on this item? Okay. All right, then moving on to board committee reports. Culture, climate, and learning, Dan?
Yeah, well, this evening, in terms of the update regarding the IB program and the update regarding the mental health services, that pretty much captures it. There was also discussion, and Bob and I managed to misspeak at the meeting about it, but there was I think some discussion about strategic planning, looking forward to that. But not in any, not
Yeah, as
concrete
far
way.
as what process in regard to an update.
Right.
And then also, the state does have a comprehensive plan requirement that does kick in, and our deadline for submission is next August.
Right. Thank you. That pretty much
So,
captures it.
yeah, I'll come back to Dan with the CCL agenda, and I'll talk with Amber and Amy about how that interfaces with the full board.
Sounds good. Then looking at some of our upcoming items on the schedule. On the 9th, we have another board conversation with the community that we're going to do I think over Zoom. It's going to be a remote opportunity for anyone who hasn't been able to come out to any of our in-person events over the past month or so to be able to do so online. And then we have Communications Committee, Finance and Audit, and CCL Committee dates listed here on the agenda as well. Our next meeting is November 15th in terms of our regular board meeting. And we were planning to bring policies 006 and 903 back for action. At that time, we had reviewed those at our last full board meeting. And then moving forward, you can see the schedule going into December. With that, I'd like a motion to adjourn to executive session.
Just brief.
Sorry.
Yeah, to a brief
Brief executive. Yes, faces were like, what?
I got an email, there was not one.
You're right.
You're
This is
right.
called bait and
There was
switch.
So moved.
Yeah.
Second, yeah. Okay. Second, all right. All in favor of adjourning? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. We are adjourned.